Your brain is physically different from most of the people around you, and we know that because scientists have measured it. Not a metaphor, not a personality label. A 2021 fMRI study confirmed that people who process information at greater depth show enhanced resting state connectivity across the brain networks responsible for attention control, memory consolidation, and deliberate reasoning. If you have always felt like you experience life at a different frequency than most people, more layered, more intense, more exhausting in ways you can barely explain, that is not a quirk. That is not oversensitivity. That is neurology. And yet, almost nobody has ever told you that. Instead, you got told you think too much. You were described as intense. Maybe a little much. You watched people breeze through situations that left you quietly processing for days, and you wondered quietly, privately, whether something was wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. You are not broken. You are built differently. And there is a measurable, documented, reproducible reason for every single thing you are about to recognize in yourself. Most videos on this topic hand you a behavioral checklist. Signs you are a deep thinker according to psychology, and then they read off a list that could apply to almost anyone on a reflective day. That is not what this is. Every sign in this video is grounded in specific research, specific researchers, and specific neuroscience. And more importantly, each one is going to name something you have already lived before it explains why. Let's start at the very beginning of how your mind works. You do not just process what happened. You process what it means, why it happened, what it says about the pattern underneath it, and what that pattern says about something even deeper than that. While most people receive information and file it away, your brain runs it through multiple interpretive layers almost automatically. Elaine Aron, a research psychologist who spent decades studying this, called it sensory processing sensitivity, SPS for short. And what she found is that roughly 15 to 20% of the population processes incoming information at a significantly deeper level than everyone else. More recent estimates push that closer to 30%. Either way, it is a minority. And fMRI research shows exactly what that looks like in the brain: heightened connectivity between the hippocampus and the precuneus, the regions tied to episodic memory and self-reflection. Your brain is not overthinking. It is doing more by design. The lived experience of this is almost impossible to describe to someone who does not have it. A conversation you had 3 weeks ago still surfaces when you are trying to fall asleep. Not because you are anxious about it, but because some piece of it still does not fully add up and your brain refuses to file it as resolved. You watch a movie and come out of it carrying the emotional weight of a character choice that everyone else forgot before the credits finished rolling. You read one sentence in an article and end up 4 hours later deep in research you never planned to do. Not because you lack focus, because your brain found a thread and it absolutely will not drop it until it reaches the end. That thread-following instinct is actually its own sign. The psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski spent years studying gifted and deeply sensitive people and identified what he called overexcitabilities, areas where certain people do not just experience life normally, but experience it at an amplified level. One of these is intellectual overexcitability, and it does not look like intelligence in the conventional sense. It looks like compulsion. You do not just get curious about something, you get consumed by it. One question becomes 10. 10 become a research spiral. The spiral becomes a personal obsession for 3 weeks. Then it stops just as suddenly as it started, and something else takes its place. 88% of gifted students in research measuring this scored high on at least one of Dabrowski's overexcitabilities. The intellectual drive you feel, the one that makes you seem obsessive or unfocused to people around you, is one of the most documented signatures of a mind built for depth. And there is something that connects directly to that obsessive research instinct. You notice when certainty is unearned. You walk into a room and within minutes you have registered the inconsistencies. The person who speaks with total confidence but whose reasoning does not actually hold together. The explanation that sounds clean but skips 3 steps. The consensus that everyone seems to accept without anyone having actually checked it. You do not do this to be contrarian. You do not do it to cause problems. It happens automatically. Your brain pattern matches at a level that catches what other people's brains smooth over. And this is tied directly to something psychologists call intellectual humility, but not the way most people understand that phrase. Here is the counterintuitive part. The Dunning-Kruger effect is usually talked about in one direction. Low-ability people overestimate their competence. But the other side of that curve is just as important, and almost nobody talks about it. High-ability people consistently underestimate their competence. The more you actually know, the more aware you become of everything you do not know. The more you understand how a system works, the more you see how many ways it can fail. This means that deep thinkers, people who genuinely engage with complexity, experience chronic doubt, not from insecurity but from accuracy. Your uncertainty is not a weakness. It is a calibration that most people around you simply do not have access to. But here is where it starts to cost you something. Because in groups, confidence outperforms nuance. Psychologists studying group dynamics have found that people gravitate towards certainty, even when the certain person is wrong. A person who says, "I know exactly what's happening," will be trusted over a person who says, "It's complicated and here's why." Even when the complicated answer is correct, that is a structural bias baked into how groups process information. And if you have ever felt passed over, overlooked, or quietly dismissed in favor of someone louder and less careful, that is exactly what you just experienced. It is not a personal failure. It is a group psychology phenomenon with a name. Researchers call it the mirror effect. Deep thinkers, by their mere presence, reflect the cognitive limitations of the people around them. And groups do not thank you for that. They push back. Which leads directly to something you have probably felt your entire life, that being alone does not actually feel that lonely, but being in the wrong room with the wrong people feels devastatingly isolating. Most people assume that loneliness is the absence of other people. For deep thinkers, loneliness is far more specific than that. It is the absence of real exchange. It is being surrounded by conversation that never breaks the surface. A 2021 qualitative study published in PMC found that adults who score high in sensory processing sensitivity consistently report feeling more misunderstood, more emotionally out of sync with groups, and more drained by social environments than the general population. And the key word there is drained. Not just bored, not just uncomfortable, genuinely depleted, as if the effort of being present in shallow company costs something that cannot be easily recovered. And this is not introversion, although the two often travel together. About 70% of highly sensitive people are introverted, but 30% are extroverted. Deep thinking is not about needing quiet. It is about needing bandwidth. Your brain craves high-quality exchange, real ideas, actual honesty, the kind of conversation where someone says something that changes the way you see something else, and you both feel it. When that is absent and replaced by small talk, surface performance, and conversations that loop back on themselves without going anywhere, you do not just get bored. You feel the gap between what connection could be and what it actually is. And that gap is sharp. Small talk specifically. It drains you in a way that is genuinely hard to explain to people who do not experience it. It is not that you cannot do it. You can. You have probably spent years getting quite good at it. But there is a cost. Every small talk interaction requires you to run two parallel processes. The surface-level exchange that the other person sees, and the internal layer where your actual brain is sitting quietly, waiting for something real to happen. That double processing burns energy. Over a full day of it, you come home exhausted in a way that does not feel like physical tiredness. It feels like cognitive depletion. Like something was running in the background all day and finally got shut down. Here is one that might be the most misunderstood of all. You have been told that you think too much, and for years you may have believed it. The phrase, "you overthink everything," is used so casually that most deep thinkers absorb it as fact. But there is a neurological distinction that changes everything about how you should understand this. Deep thinking and overthinking are not the same process. They do not even use the same brain network. Deep thinking activates the central executive network, the prefrontal, goal-directed, curiosity-driven part of your cognition. Feels calm. Feels energizing. It moves toward resolution even if slowly. Overthinking activates the default mode network, the anxiety-driven, self-referential loop that cycles without resolution and drains without output. One is a feature. The other is a stress response. The problem is that from the outside, both look the same. Both look like someone staring at the ceiling for a long time. Both look like too much. But inside, They are completely different experiences. And if you know what to look for, you can feel the difference. When you are genuinely deep in thought, there is momentum. There is something pulling you forward, even if slowly. When you are overthinking, you are spinning. Same spot, different rotation, no exit. You are not an overthinker. You have been mislabeled. And the mislabeling runs deeper than that. Many deep thinkers have, at some point, been handed a diagnosis that did not quite fit. Anxiety, ADHD, dysthymia, and sometimes those diagnoses are accurate. But sometimes what actually happened is that a highly sensitive, intellectually overexcitable person sat in a clinical intake and described their internal life. The racing thoughts, the emotional intensity, the difficulty staying in shallow situations for long, and the clinician matched it to the closest available category. Intellectual overexcitability and existential depression, which are well documented in research on sensitive and gifted individuals, are almost never on the intake checklist. The Davidson Institute has documented this directly. Gifted and deeply sensitive people are more susceptible to what they call spontaneous existential depression. Not grief, not trauma-triggered, but the weight of awareness itself. The heaviness that arrives when you sit with questions that have no clean resolution. Questions about meaning, about mortality, about whether anyone is actually being honest, about why things are the way they are when they could be different. These questions do not leave you alone, and you do not want them to. That is the final sign and possibly the deepest one. You carry questions that have no clean answers, and you cannot walk away from them. Most people, when confronted with an unanswerable question, move on. Not defensively, just naturally. They find the edge of the question, register that there is no resolution available, and redirect their attention to something more solvable. Deep thinkers do not do that. The unresolvable question is not a dead end. It is an invitation. You sit with it. You turn it over. You come back to it weeks later with a new angle. Psychologists call this tolerance for ambiguity, the ability to stay in cognitive uncertainty without the discomfort becoming unbearable. And research in integrative complexity shows that deep thinkers do not just tolerate contradiction, they move through it toward synthesis. Where average thinkers see an either slash or you see a both slash and then you start asking what the relationship between the two actually is, that capacity is rare. And it is exhausting. And it is exactly what makes your mind capable of understanding things that most people will never fully reach. There is something worth sitting with at the end of all of this. None of what you just heard is meant to make you feel superior to anyone. That is not the point. Depth of processing is not a competition. It comes with real costs, the social friction, the chronic doubt, the loneliness in the middle of a crowd, the questions that never let you rest. You have felt all of those. And for a long time, you may have carried them as evidence that something was wrong with you. What the research says is that those costs are real, but they are not signs of damage. They are the exact and predictable friction that happens when a brain built for depth lives in a world that mostly rewards speed. You are not too much. You are not broken. You have a brain that was built and has always been built to go further than most people are willing to go. So tell me, which one of these landed hardest for you? The one about small talk draining you, the mislabeling as an overthinker, or something else entirely? Drop it in the comments. I read all of them, and I genuinely want to know which of these you have been carrying the longest without anyone ever putting a name to it. If this gave you something, a little clarity, a little relief, a name for something you could not explain before, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Not everyone, just the one person you already thought of while you were watching this. And subscribe if you are not already, because next week we are going into why deep thinkers so often attract the wrong relationships, and what the psychology of that actually looks like. You will not want to miss that one.